Gnosticism was simply demonic. And so you can't use the term demonic in most church history classes, or at least in most history classes. You're not allowed to say things like that. But for a believer, you look at what Gnosticism taught, it's demonic. It is devilish, satanic to its core. Because the one true God, the New Testament belabors the fact, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has revealed himself in Jesus Christ. This is fundamental to the New Testament teaching. That is fundamentally denied. And the God who created this world is an arrogant, stupid creature who, and I was doing some more reading on it, so I'm just going to give you what I understand right now. I've talked to you about the eons that, how did I get into this? I wasn't going to spend as much time, but this is the problem. You can't even talk about a little part of it and make it understandable without fitting it into this massively complicated cosmogony. This whole story of how everything came into existence and all the rest of this stuff. But the one true God who isn't a God like we conceive of a God. This is the true light who has just been at peace in eternity, but is not the creator of all things and is not the self-sufficient source of its own existence or personal, self-glorifying, none of these things. But this pure God emanates thoughts, states of thought. And these emanations can then interact with one another. We automatically think of these as persons, creatures. There's an element of that, but then there's not an element of that. These are the eons that come forth from the one God, which is not monotheism. But it's not monotheism by any stretch of the imagination. But they come forth. One of the last emanations is Sophia. Now, what does Sophia mean? Sophia means wisdom, feminine. And, different systems had different numbers. There's 12, and then there's a second 12. And it all depends on who you're talking to. I'm going to get back to Irenaeus here in a second. Each one has a pair. So it's a male-female pair, and that creates harmony and balance. Harmony and balance, big thing. Big thing, got to have harmony and balance. Well, Sophia contemplates the source without consulting her consort and becomes so excited in her contemplation of the one true source that she brings forth a misformed thought that is a being. And she's embarrassed that the other eons will find out that she's done this because she shouldn't have done it separately from her. There was disharmony, see. And so she basically thrusts this thing out of the pleroma, the fullness, and somehow, and I haven't quite figured out exactly how this works, or if it's just a matter of differing views, because there were Valentinian spins, and if you get down toward Egypt, then it has another spin, and just tremendously complex. From this divine but misshapen creature that is removed by Sophia from the pleroma, somehow that either becomes or gives birth to the God of this world, called a number of different names within Gnosticism, but attached to the name Jehovah. That's where Jehovah comes from. in Gnosticism. And hence, there's this really complicated, just as there is in Manichaeism, there's this really complicated mythology about how mankind becomes created and how the eons get involved. So there is the dual nature of man, the spiritual nature and the fleshly nature, and there's rape involved, and but then again there is a Manichaeism too. So yeah, okay, it gets incredibly complex, just wild. But the whole idea is disharmony between what we would call attributes of the one God. And interesting enough, it's wisdom, Sophia, that is responsible. Now, she is sort of like redeemed. And, you know, once it becomes known what she did amongst the eons, she's brought back in and everybody's cool. And, yeah, if you can describe it that way. But it was wisdom, Sophia, that was the one that started the path toward the creation of this. She experienced confusion and something else. I was just reading it. I was actually going to have a little story time with Jimmy today, but I just decided I didn't want to put you all through it because takes us back to where we were. Irenaeus. Up until we discovered the Nag Hammadi library in the last century, we were almost completely dependent upon Irenaeus's description of Gnosticism to understand what the system was. His book Against Heresies starts off with a entire section. If you're sitting there going, that guy's just so stupid, he can't explain this to us. Here's what you need to do. Go online, look up Against Heresies by Irenaeus, read book 1, chapter 1 and following, and he will lay out Gnosticism for you. And I just go, okay, you try to summarize that in less than 10 minutes. Good luck. Ain't gonna happen. It's amazing. Go online, look up Gnostic eons, hit graphics. Be careful about that. Hope your filter's on. But you'll see the same thing. Even the graphics trying to show the relationship of the eons to each other and the dodeca and the deca, and it's really complicated. So I guess mentioning Irenaeus is what got me off on this tangent, because I can really appreciate the fact that Irenaeus did a really good job describing Gnosticism. He did his homework. Now, scholars would say, well, now that we have the Nag Hammadi, he wasn't exactly right about this. But look, given that he's in Gaul, he's in France. This isn't exactly the hometown of Gnosticism. He did a really good job in laying out what the problems were and what the errors were, and it's quite in depth. He did a much better job than a lot of people credit him. In fact, we were able to recognize what was in the Nag Hammadi library because we had Irenaeus. We're like, oh, did you know? Remember in 2006 when the Gospel of Judas came out? Remember there was all the big discussion about the Gospel of Judas, and it was, you know, more of it has come out since then, and it's a weird. I mean, it is. Guess who we knew it existed? You know how we knew? Irenaeus described it. That's how we knew when we had it, is Irenaeus had done that good of a job. So I can really appreciate an Irenaeus. But his doctrine of the atonement was totally whacked. It really was. It was called the recapitulation theory. I've told you about it before, but I've told you about it in another context. The recapitulation theory was that Jesus had to live through all the ages of man to redeem all the ages of man. So that's why Irenaeus is the first one to use the phrase apostolic tradition. That he had an apostolic tradition that had been passed down from the apostles, that Jesus was more than 50 years old when he died. Now, nobody today believes that, but that's the earliest reference to apostolic tradition in the patristic sources. So I can read against heresies and really appreciate what work went into that. But I always have to keep in mind Irenaeus, his doctrine of atonement was not biblical. He thought it was, and we can't know exactly what canon of scripture he necessarily had. I mean, I'm sure someone's written a study of it, but were certain books of scripture only recently available in his area or known to be scripture? You know, I try to have as broad a extension of grace that I possibly can in those first years, in those first centuries, because I know how dependent I am, and you are, on those who came before us. We have inherited a fully developed theological language. You didn't know that. No one walked up to you. Let's say you walked an aisle in a Baptist church. Nobody walked up to you and handed you the theological lingo book. But you picked it up fast. You picked it up fast. It was picked up in the conversations going on in Sunday school, and it's picked up in the services, and it's picked up from music, our hymns. Man, there's a lot of theology in those things. And you learn the language. Well, that took a long time to develop. We've had an advantage that those early church fathers did not have. And so I can appreciate Irenaeus while going, yeah, but his doctrine. Now, he didn't know what I know about some of the backgrounds and didn't have the commentaries, and he took over the group there in Lyon because the previous bishop was killed. There had been bad persecution, and we don't know when he died because he probably died in persecution too. So cut the guy a break, basically, is what I'm saying. Don't judge him on standards that he didn't have. Okay? But that also means I have to go, yeah, okay, I hear what he's saying on this, that, or the other thing. That's why we have to be so careful in how we handle the early church fathers. The point is this. We need to have, and so we want to have a consistent theology. Why am I even investing my time? Other than the cool, enjoyable thing about getting to teach church history on the dividing line to a depth that at least some of you appreciate, some others maybe have just tuned us out, I don't know. But why respond to things? Because we're being told by Ken Wilson and Leighton Flowers and these people that the deepest central insight of Reformed theology, which is that God is God and we are not, that God is absolutely sovereign, that his self-glorification is sufficient reason for all of creation and redemption, that he is the creator of all things, that he has the right to decree the very fabric of time, and then amazingly, he enters into the fabric of time as a part of his decree. Something no Manichaean, Gnostic, or Stoic could have ever dreamed of. But anyway, we're being told that central, beautiful reality that changes everything. And you in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. You know what it was like to all of a sudden realize God is really God. And he has the right to do with his creation as he sees fit to his glory. And the amazing thing is, he's chosen to enter into his own creation and join a people to himself. That central reality, we're being told, is actually a straight line borrowing from Stoicism, Gnosticism, and Manichaeism. So I know that's not true. I know that's patently absurd. But I'm seeing people being influenced by that because it comes from two directions. It is natural for man to put himself in the center. It is natural for man to decentralize God's intentions and go with the man-centeredness on the theology side. And then join that with the simple reality that the man in the pew in the world today has no idea what Manichaeism was, what Gnosticism was, what the Stoics believed. And therefore, someone comes along and says, believe me, here's some quotes. You put the two together, and it becomes a very noxious fume. And I'm just turning the fan on to blow it out the windows, that's all. But I think it's an important thing to do. And in the process, hopefully, edify a whole bunch of folks and teach you, and by example, to be able to read Irenaeus against Heresies and go, man, this guy put a lot of work into this. And isn't it amazing? It's something written this long ago. We can still read it. And he was really concerned about apologetics in his day. And man, his stuff is really twisted by liberals and things like that today. And he's attacked and all that kind of stuff. But then at the same time, when you then read someplace else and all of a sudden he says something weird about recapitulation and stuff like that, you don't just automatically go, burn him, burn his works, heretic. No, you go, well, he's alive in the 2nd century and man, I've got access to a whole lot more. And isn't it wonderful that God has not left us to our own devices, and there has been people who've been able to work through these things, and we can use the language we've developed to understand these things. And so instead of it being I'm going to exercise judgment and get the flamethrower out and identify Irenaeus as a heretic because he had a different view than I do, though he wouldn't have known what your view was. So that's the point, you see. I can be really thankful for even people who had different views than I did in the past. I think that involves maturity and growth, and that's what we need in our day. And while we still have the freedom to be doing this, while we still have this program, and we haven't been shut down by the bots yet, for not bowing to Big Brother and Big Brother's definition of truth, and we need to do what we can do.